A game 5 for the ages is coming between the Chicago Sky and the Connecticut Sun right in the Windy City. Our Chicago Sky expert, James Kay, is here to talk about it. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Is there an extra charge in the air? Does the air smell a little sweeter? Does the sun shine a little brighter? It's because it is game 5 day, everybody. I am Howard Megdal, and welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball, your everyday source for women's basketball, 24/7, 365, over at thenexthoops.com. You can also listen to us by subscribing to Locked On Women's Basketball everywhere you get your podcasts. Make sure you're reading the good folks at The Next, including, of course, James Kay does a terrific job covering the Chicago Sky. And the Chicago Sky are facing what is potentially and shockingly their final game of the season if they can't pull out a win. So, James, welcome. I know we're kind of still processing what took place in game 4. I was there in person, sitting next to the Chicago Sky bench. I know they were still processing what was going on. How shocked were you about what took place on Tuesday night in Uncasville?
Well, considering that for the Next, I wrote that the Sky or the Sun's margin for error was infinitesimal, I thought that this series was over, quite honestly. I really thought the Sky had really solved what the Sun were throwing at them. And I got to give Connecticut all the credit in the world for just being able to, at a short turnaround, come back from an emotional loss like they had in game 4. So like they had in game 3, excuse me. So I was pretty shocked by what happened last night.
It was fascinating to me when you think about it from the Sun perspective. And we should just talk about that very briefly, because obviously both teams are playing tonight. But they made the decision, Kurt Miller made the decision with 3:37 to go. You referenced it in your piece, which people can read over at thenexthoops.com. They didn't read both pieces about your game 3 and game 4. And I would urge you to do so to have an understanding of what's taking place here. But Kurt Miller benched Jonquel Jones, the reigning WNBA MVP, with 3:37 to go, and promptly put in Courtney Williams. It was a big move at the time. It didn't pay off in terms of a victory. My podcast earlier this week talked about it in great depth, and we talked to Kurt about it. But the flip side of it was it may have electrified Courtney Williams. And Courtney Williams feels like the X factor that the Sky really couldn't solve. And so my question for you, and I talked to Lynn Dunn about this on the podcast yesterday when she joined us, asked Kurt about it as well, was how much of this was Courtney Williams activated to be the Courtney Williams of old, and how much of it was just the Sky not managing the defensive rotations as such to stop her on, what seemed like an endless stream of backdoor passes out of the bigs getting double teamed.
I think it's a blend of both, honestly. I mean, if you look at Courtney Williams in game 3, I know the shooting numbers weren't perfect, but when you look at her decision making is someone that was just passing up some of those contested mid-range shots that aren't necessarily the most efficient in a series like this when you're facing a Sky backcourt and front court that is so active and is going to get in your face. And her passing up those shots and just getting to the rim or trying to find someone down low, just keeping the ball moving. That's been the problem with this Sun offense, is not keeping the ball moving. So when Courtney Williams was doing that, I mean, yeah, she had like 3 assists last night, but again, she opened up more opportunities for her teammates than what looks like simply in a traditional box score. So with that said, the Sky really were falling apart when it came to some of those backdoor cuts that Courtney Williams, what we saw last night was just the Sky looking a little bit confused whenever Courtney cut to the rim. And if you're going to stop Courtney Williams, you got to keep her in front of her and make her take those late in the shot clock contested mid-range shots, and we just didn't see that last night. That's obviously Courtney Williams was not the only reason why Connecticut was successful on offense last night, but she had a big part of it, and her decision making mixed with this guy being late and just a step slow on some of those defensive rotations really did them in.
A confidence from Courtney Williams, a confident Courtney Williams, I should say, is always dangerous. We saw her almost manage to win a championship in 2019 alongside Jonquel Jones, who, again, her numbers were not great, but the physicality that she brought to that night, the fact that she was making good decisions out of those double teams. Kurt talked after the game. He almost wished she were a little more selfish on some of them, but she also led the team in assists in a game that they won by 24. And so it's very hard to fault her for what she was able to do. Why do you think she was able to operate with not impunity, but with more freedom than we saw from her, particularly in game 3?
Honestly, it was I like to look at the X's and O's, but it really felt like the difference between these two teams, not just with Jonquel Jones, it was the energy. I mean, Jonquel Jones didn't seem like she was overwhelmed by what this guy were throwing at her, and her getting going in the first quarter, like I think she had 7 of her points in the first quarter, if I'm not mistaken, like 5 or 7 points in the first quarter. Her just getting going like that, even if there's not a ton of scoring output the rest of the way, I mean, that just, you could feel the Sun really feeding off of that energy. And they just didn't seem stifled like they did in game 3. Like, they like to play physical on defense. And we didn't really see it as much on the offensive end because the Sky just crowded them in the paint. I mean, they shot only 37.1% in the paint in game 3. And then you see what they did last night when they score a WNBA record 66 points in the paint and just going up so confidently. I really think Jonquel Jones really did set the table like for them moving forward here. And I think it makes game 5 really interesting if they're able to carry that energy, especially in the first quarter. I think this is one of those games in game 5 that's going to be one, and we know where the energy is going to be the rest of the way is going to be dictated in that first quarter. So yeah, you got to give Jonquel so much credit for really sparking that in the Sun yesterday.
Little things are big things, the thing that Kurt Miller said to us pregame. And we're seeing that even just subtle changes made such an enormous difference. They played very much the Sky tempo, the Sky type of game. And Kurt kept his cards close to the vest, as I would understand he would when he was asked after the game, are you looking for a game that more closely approximates the Sky style, which the Sun were able to master and score 104, or the Sun style, which they used effectively in game 3, but ultimately in a loss? Do you think that the Sun need to replicate what they did in game 4, or do you think it needs to be a return to the way they played offensively and defensively in games 1 through 3?
I mean, defensively, they held the Sky to their 2 lowest scoring outputs of the season. I mean, defensively I'm not worried about the Sun defensively by any means. I mean, what they've been able to do, especially in the second half of the season, I mean, it's great work by the coaching staff, and honestly, just the front court is just so vicious. But yeah, to me, again, when I thought it was interesting hearing Kurt talk about the messiness. I mean, that's been such a thing that's been come up so many times throughout the series. He referenced it more on the defensive end than it is on the offensive end. And honestly, they played a beautiful style of play yesterday. And what everyone was able to do from a decision-making standpoint and just keeping the ball moving. I mean, I don't think it needs to be messy. I don't think when you look at games 1 through 3, that offense just didn't look as cohesive as it did yesterday. And there's, I don't think you're going to expect DeWanna Bonner to go 3 for 7 from beyond the arc. There is a couple. I think you can live with some of the shots that, if you're the Sky, you can live with some of the shots that Connecticut had. Or like AT, you want to take out her in the paint. You can let her get away with that push shot in the middle, by the free throw line. Same thing with Bree Jones. You just can't let them destroy you in the paint. And I just think that in terms of the messiness, it's all going to come on the defensive side. And they do have to keep playing physical, because if you look at how the Sky ran their offense, it seemed like anytime they got to the paint, they were anticipating the physicality, which if you're a scorer, you want to just be thinking about getting to the rim and finishing at the rim and not be thinking about how much your contact you're going to be absorbing trying to finish at the rim, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And in terms of what is the best available option for the Sun, like you said, it really seems like everything they were looking for, they were able to get, and they were knocking them down. DeWanna Bonner hitting threes. I mean, listen, she's a volume 3-point shooter. There are going to be nights where she does that. Bree Jones was hitting 15-footers. She's capable. It's something that she's incorporated into her game, but these aren't necessarily the shots that the Sun would want to get. It is, and Kurt spoke about this, a make or miss league. And so if those are all going down, ultimately they're going to be successful. The guarantee is not, in fact, from the Sun at all, or the Sky. The guarantee, James, comes from Built Bar Puffs, and specifically the cookie dough chunt puffs, who have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunts, and they are covered in, what would you estimate? What percentage of real chocolate do you think cookie dough puffs have? You say 40%, 60%? What do you think?
I'll split the difference. I'll go like 52%.
I mean, it's a great guess, and that would be amazing in and of itself. But no, it's actually 100% real chocolate. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. There's delicious candy bars, but probably terrible for you, right? No, 160 calories, 15 grams net protein. I had long drives to and from Mohegan Sun on Tuesday. You know what got me there? Built Bar cookie dough chunt puffs. You know what got me home? Built Bar cookie dough chunt puffs. So go to built.com and use the promo code LOCKEDON15. That's LOCKEDON15 and get 15% off your order. And James, I cannot stress this enough to you. When you do it, tell them Grandma Myrna sent you.
Why is that,
so,
Howard?
Well, she would never forgive either of us if you didn't. So when we think about what the Sky need to change, I'm taken back to a moment during Tuesday night's game. It was midway through the second quarter. James Wade was very upset about a call. He had an extended soliloquy, I guess is sort of the nice way of putting it, about the call to the refs, ultimately earned a technical foul. We saw Candace, who was keeping things calm throughout the first, throughout the second. We've got this, came over, calming her coach down. I don't know what the right answer was, because ultimately calm did not get it done. And James was not getting the performance out of his team that he wanted. Going into a game 5, what does the mindset need to be for this Sky team? Does this Sky team play better when they're calming down and taking care of business, or do they need to be revved up?
It kind of seems like they need to be revved up, and not in terms of being angry, but just being like, oh, we have to step up right now, because if you look at how they played in game 1 against the Liberty versus how they played in game 2 against New York, there was just urgency. There was a certain energy that was palpable that you kind of have to need in a setting like this. And I really felt that while Connecticut beat the Sky through and through, there were a lot of plays where the Sky beat themselves. And that's something that I think comes from that energy and not executing. I mean, even Allie Quigley said last night, and she doesn't make grand statements, but she said, like, we weren't focused. Like, that to me is like, wow, that is a huge thing to say coming out of a playoff game. And I think she's right. I mean, they would have a better assessment of that than we would. But to me, it's all about that urgency and that energy from the tip of being like, we have to go out and get this right now. And it didn't really feel like that, especially in the first 5 minutes of this game.
I know that she hasn't made a formal announcement. There may well be the end of Allie Quigley's career coming at the end of this season. I wonder to what extent that can play a part. And, Kurt has talked about the window of opportunity to win a championship for the Sun. But look, as presently constructed, this is a team that operates with a tremendous amount of value out of Allie Quigley, who we don't know whether she's going to return next year or not, and Candace Parker, who is still very much up in the air in terms of what she's going to do next year. And so, that sense of urgency, I don't know. Do you state it? Do you have that conversation? I'm curious what they do in order to get that sense of urgency. But I do want to talk about some other players who aren't discussed in the same way. And we talked about it off the air, the fact that the Sun outscored the Sky on bench points on Tuesday night, 38-19. It does, however, bear noting that we seem to see Julie Allemand more comfortable and more willing to shoot in this series than we saw her for much of the season. Somebody who's been an extremely efficient scorer, but has at times been reluctant to do it. What are you seeing out of Julie Allemand and just the bench more generally here with the Chicago Sky?
I think Julie Allemand doesn't get enough credit for her play. Again, if you just look at the box score, it won't jump out to you, but the way that she is able to come in and provide comparable minutes to Courtney Vandersloot and just in what she's able to do and just keeping the offense going, finding the open person. I do think that she can be too unselfish at times, but you're right, Howard. She has looked more comfortable shooting. It's been a topic point or a talking point that we've been going over throughout the entire season. Like, what's going on? Like, how is Julie Allemand, someone who shot, I think, over 45% from beyond the arc in 2020 with the Fever, and has shown overseas that she is a shooter. How is she shooting under 30% with the Sky? And I really don't know what has been going on there, but we've seen teams go under her on screens. I don't think Connecticut can do that now. I think she has looked more comfortable with that shot. I mean, she had that 1-3, one of her 2 attempts yesterday, where Emma Meeseman found her on the wing, and I think in the waning seconds of the possession, and Julie caught it. It was just so smooth. She just got into her shot and made it. And a little bit later on, I mean, she also had the Sun stopped the Sky's first 2 actions on a possession, and then Julie stepped up and hit a baseline jumper. I mean, Julie's capable of doing this, and I do think that she's someone that's just keeps everything steady. But I know a lot of Sky fans want to see more Dana Evans, and I think that cacophony of calls for her to be more of an integral part coming off of the bench grew louder after she scored 10 points last night. But I think, go for it.
No, yeah, Dana looked terrific down the stretch. And, it was garbage time, but it's still the playoffs, and it was still an opportunity to show what she can do. In terms of Julie, the thing that sticks out to me is she's now logged 85 minutes in the playoffs, and she has 4 turnovers total, a 4-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, someone who has essentially halved her turnover percentage from the regular season. That was, to my mind, the only thing standing in the way of Julie Allemand becoming a frontline starting point guard in the WNBA. If this is the Julie Allemand that we are now going to see going forward, do you think this is somebody who offers a potential opportunity if Courtney Vandersloot decides to move on?
Oh, absolutely. She's someone that when the Sky acquired her with little leverage in the Diamond to Shields negotiate. I mean, again, anytime you have a restricted free agent in a 12-team league, where again, that WNBA players have more leverage over WNBA teams just because they can just be like, all right, I'm sitting out. So they turned Julie Allemand. They turned Diamond to Shields into Julie Allemand in the 2023 first-round pick. And to me, the 2023 first-round pick is great, but Julie Allemand, what she did in 2020 with that Fever team, she's someone that hasn't shown her ability as a combo guard as much this season, but she's someone that can score the basketball. One of the things that Courtney Vandersloot did so well in that first half yesterday was getting to the rim and, splitting the hedges and finding her way to the rim. And Julie has the capability to do the same thing. She's had a lot of impressive finishes at the rim this year. It's just that shot that's probably stopped people from really seeing what her full potential is. I think Julie is someone that can be a starting point guard in this league. She's one of the best point guards in the world, let's be honest. I have a hard time seeing that the Sky wouldn't at least give Julie a shot next year, given that she's still on a rookie scale contract that hovers around $60,000. So, yeah.
Rookie scale, just turned 26. We're going to see her for at least part, it depends on what happens Thursday night, perhaps all of the upcoming international tournament with the Belgian Cats. So I am going to be fascinated to see what comes next. Bottom line, I'm not going to ask you for a prediction because we can't predict this game. We can't predict this sport, this wonderful sport, which is something I love about it as I'm watching it unfold in front of me last night. But if the Chicago Sky do not repeat, if things end here, what do you think is the ultimate legacy of this team? Is a team that was able to bring a championship to Chicago? Is one enough when you think about what their aspirations are? I'm just curious, in the broader picture, what you think this all means for the James Wade era Chicago Sky project that we're looking at right now.
This is a really good question. It's something that I haven't really framed it in this way in my mind when I think about the Sky 24/7, but I do think that getting one for a franchise that was just starving for a championship, that got its first one last year, having Candace Parker come in year one, despite all of the struggles they endured from a chemistry standpoint, from a injury standpoint, from just an expectation standpoint. I mean, oh my God, like what they were able to do last year is still something that I can't believe they were able to achieve given the regular season, quote unquote, turmoil. I think if you ask the Sky, that they will be disappointed that, Allie Quigley taking a $59,000 pay decrease to come back and then not make it back to the finals. I mean, that's probably a disappointment. I mean, everyone took a little bit of a pay decrease to come back and make this work. But I do think that this wouldn't be a stain on James Wade's legacy. I do think winning is just so much harder than people make it out to be. You can have the best roster in the world. You can be on the hottest streak for the first 36 games of the season, and everything can fall apart come the postseason. Winning's freaking hard. And I think what James Wade's been able to do over these last few years and get them even to this point after, again, these franchise just starving for a championship. I wouldn't necessarily consider it a failure, but I don't think that they'll be satisfied just getting to this point, because Game 5 is going to be, and this is not hyperbole, one of the most important games in franchise history coming up because of all the things that you outlined from a contract standpoint.
No doubt about it. And I'm with you. I think people are quick to denigrate. I think people are slow to appreciate. In this space in particular, it is incredibly difficult. The list of repeat champions, even those Minnesota Lynx teams, won four championships, but they didn't repeat at any point. Those are staggered, and it is an incredibly difficult thing. I think the championship, in the same way that we hold Kurt Miller, in my mind, to an unfair standard. He's brought the Connecticut Sun to a half decade of significant success year in and year out. And yet there are people who are critical for him not winning a title. Well, we'll see. One way or another, either Kurt Miller or James Wade is going to have an opportunity to play in the WNBA finals after Thursday night. So I cannot wait to see it. I want to thank our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Now for your second, go check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NFL season. The local team experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, plus a betting angle from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets, all combining into one ultimate NFL preview. Search for Ultimate Pro Football Preview on 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. James, I was last really kind of plugged into the NFL after the '85 season and the Super Bowl Shuffle by William the Refrigerator Perry. I assume the Bears have continued as a dynasty in the 37 years since. Is that correct?
Howard, I hope you're not a Bears fan, because that is not quite what ensued after Walter Payton and the Bears were able to pull that one off. So
Yeah.
might not want to go to Pro Football Reference for that one.
I will have to check it out. Apparently, I have missed quite a bit while I have been asleep for these last 40 years or so, let's say. It sounds like things not so good for the Bears. No, well, good to know. I'll file that away. Well, James K, make sure everyone, if you're not watching us on YouTube, if you're listening, at James_M_K. James has a must-listen podcast of his own, the Skyhook Podcast. Always read what he has to say. James, always great to see you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me, Howard.
And to our listeners, make sure you tune in tomorrow as well. We're going to have constant coverage right through the end of the WNBA playoffs. And then, of course, more coverage, because this is what we're going to do year round. We are always covering the world of women's basketball. I am Howard Megdal, wishing you a wonderful day.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.